AYLA TESLER-MABE. My name is not Jimi Hendrix, but that is the name of the person that this lesson is focused on. The great Jimi Hendrix, one of the most music and world-altering artists of all time. And we're going to be looking at the 6 iconic Jimi Hendrix riffs that changed history. It was really hard to distill this list down to 6. It actually took me hours to think of just 6 I could use, but I think these riffs are all so great to learn because they're fantastic. It's a great way to internalize great playing because you're learning directly from one of the greatest musicians ever by learning his music. And thirdly, these riffs in particular are so great for situations where, say you show up to a jam session, you end up in some long jam and suddenly you have the opportunity to lay down a cool riff and launch into a new part of the groove, I guess. These riffs work really well for that. So number 1 on this list, one of the coolest Hendrix riffs ever, from Machine Gun, when he performed with Billy Cox and Buddy Miles. They did multiple different takes of this song, and every take was a little different, a jam ranging from 10 to 20 minutes. But one thing all of these jams had in common is they would launch into this extremely cool riff. That wasn't cool. This will be cooler. And it's the one part of the song where Jimi Hendrix is locked in with the bass. And it's such a powerful moment. It's so cool. And this riff is originally in D, because his guitar was very out of tune sometimes when he played it. Sometimes his guitar would be in E flat. I think it just depended on whatever tuning his guitar landed in, because he was going crazy with the tremolo system and everything. But because I'm in standard tuning right now, we're going to play it in E. And long story short, if you want to play it in D or E flat and use the open strings like I just did, just tune your guitar to whichever tuning you prefer. But essentially, it's all coming from the pentatonic scale. Down the octave, back up to the G string, and then ending with that little walk up. And trying to throw in some vibrato will make it very powerful. I really dug into the strings when I played it earlier, and that could be a great approach as well. And like I did in the very first example, playing with the track, throwing some univibe on could be very cool, because that's an effect that he used a lot, but especially during these live performances, playing Machine Gun. And man, this riff is so good. Okay, so iconic riff number 2 is Foxey Lady. Definitely one of the most well-known and iconic Jimi Hendrix riffs, for a good reason. There is so much swagger to it. It's so cool. And to give a little bit of historical context, just imagine you're in the year 1967, when the Jimi Hendrix Experience's first record, Are You Experienced?, hit the streets and came out. All around the world, other than North America, this was the opening track, because Purple Haze was the opening track of all pressings in the US and Canada. However, everywhere else in the world, Foxey Lady was the opening track. And just imagine hearing this for the first time, starting with that screeching feedback, which I don't have the guitar and amp cranked quite enough to get the crazy feedback he has in the original version, but he swells in, and then what you hear is that note, which is again achieved through him getting crazy screeching feedback. But let's say that's not something you can do given the volume you want to play at. You can just come up to the 10th fret and bend, and that'll still be a really cool sound. But most importantly, swelling in. And I've seen that opening played in various different places on the neck, and in a lot of live recordings I've seen, Jimi Hendrix seemed to have played it further up the neck. But in the studio recording, I thought I could hear a little bit of the open E in there as well. So to me, it seemed logical to conclude that he opened on this string and with the really wide vibrato ended up sort of hitting the E string lightly as well. And so that's why I concluded that he probably opened it there on the 7th fret of the B string, but feel free to play it in other places on the neck too. But then we launch into this very cool riff, which he played with his thumb, but if that's too far of a stretch, using your first finger as well will totally work, just because you want to be able to reach on up to the 5th fret of the B string and E string. And then you play the octave of that F sharp here on the 4th fret of the D string. And that really cool walk up. And again, the way I'm playing it now isn't precisely the same as the studio recording. This was just sort of an approach that I often heard him take in the live recordings I've heard. But basically, that walk-up seems to be a consistent part of any version he played. And then, after that walk-up, he'd play the riff with that sort of walk down back to the F sharp. I just have some overdrive on right now. Feel free to get even crazier and add some fuzz, because he definitely liked his heavy fuzzes for a lot of his heavier riffs like this. So just play around with different overdrives, different pickups, and have a lot of fun with it. All right, iconic riff number 3, Spanish Castle Magic. This is probably one of my favorite Hendrix tracks ever, and the opening is so cool. It was released in 1967 and has since been dubbed proto-heavy metal because of just how groundbreakingly heavy it was for the time. And it's so good. I keep saying this for all of these riffs because it's true. I am in awe of how cool they are. But yeah, it opens with this cool little lick that mirrors what the drum is doing at that moment, because the drum comes in with a really cool fill on the toms, and it's in unison and it's powerful. It really punches you in the face. What you do is you come up to that 11th fret of the A string, and then you do a double stop on the 9th fret of the D string and G string, and there's a little bit of a cheeky bend at the end of those. That's definitely a great skill to acquire if you want to sound a little bit closer to the way Hendrix did, because it sounds cool, but this sounds cooler. And then there's a little bit of a slide down, I think from the 12th fret of the E string, leading us to my favorite part. And I love this riff. You're just walking down like that, like an E power chord kind of thing. You know, 2nd fret D string, 2nd fret A string, open. And then you have this movement, 4th fret of the A string, 2nd fret of the D string. And then this upstroke, this is my favorite part of the riff. You put your finger, whichever one you want. I use my middle finger, I think. No, that's not true. I use my 3rd finger. And then you have that on the 4th fret of the G, and then you leave the B and E string open, and you come up with that upstroke, and it ends up sounding like this. And one last thing that's really important to note, the vibrato on that 4th fret. Because first, let me play it without vibrato, then I'll play it again with vibrato, and just take note of how much more powerful and rock and roll it sounds when you have the vibrato there. Yeah, I like like the sound of it a lot more, and it's obviously closer to what Hendrix really did, so I think that's great. And that's Spanish Castle Magic. All right, we're on to number 4. This was one of the first Hendrix songs I ever heard because it was on the game Rock Band 2. This is one of the quirkier and cooler songs off of Electric Ladyland, which is an incredible record that he put out in 1968. And the reason this song is so cool is it incorporates a lot of his R&B guitar playing roots. And this is an example of him pushing rock to its very limits by incorporating rock and soul, R&B, and all of that. And for those of you who didn't know, Hendrix was a really accomplished R&B session player and hired gun before he started the Experience. And this famous Hendrix chord that we'll hear featured in this riff was actually used even back when he was a session player, and it's obviously such a staple of his playing, but it especially exemplifies his R&B roots, I think. So it essentially starts with this opening that technically is played by the other guitar, because there are 2 guitar tracks in this song. There's the rhythm guitar, which is the part I'm showing you, because I think that part's a little easier to maybe use in a jam session to establish a groove or something like that. But you hear another part with a really warm sounding lead guitar. And I just wanted to add it in this version as well, just so you have it. And this song is down-tuned a half step, but we're playing it in E standard. So if you want to down-tune it and play the same pitch as the original, just simply tune to E flat and play the exact same frets we're playing now, and it'll work. But yeah, you're here at the 12th fret. Lots of vibrato on this note. You slide up to the 14th fret, and then here's the riff that essentially has a motif that repeats throughout, but we keep adding little variations to it as it goes. That's the main idea. So it starts with that Hendrix riff, which is here on the 4th fret of the A string. In other words, C sharp, dominant 7, sharp 9. Crazy name, right? Just call it the Hendrix chord if you want. And you have this little walk down. That's the next part. So put that whole first phrase together. Repeat it. And so, what changes in the first time versus the second time versus the third time is just the little fill at the end. So the first time was hammer on from the 2nd fret to the 4th fret. The second time was, which is really similar, right? You hammer on, then you play the note again, and then you end up playing the 2nd fret and 4th fret again. Like that. And then the last time, we have this little fill resolving to the B, because that's the chord change we end up going to. Number 5. This song took a while to grow on me, but once it did, this is easily one of my favorite Hendrix songs of all time, Burning of the Midnight Lamp. And it's just a beautiful song in general, lyrically, harmonically, everything about it, incredible guitar solos throughout. But the intro is really iconic because this was possibly the second time ever that a music listener back in 1968 would have heard a wah pedal used, because it was a brand new effect pedal at the time, and this was the second song on that album after Little Miss Strange that used that effect pedal. And the intro begins with this crazy sort of harpsichord guitar dual intro. I think the drums come in at some point on the hi-hat or something. But yeah, first we'll look at the riff without the wah pedal, and then we'll talk about how the wah pedal is really what brings the magic. And again, taking note of the fact that all of these first notes are picked normally, and then we have pick, hammer on, pick, hammer on. That's important to try playing yourself. And then the next part, hammer on, hammer on, hammer on, hammer on, pick. And then you pick all of these last notes. On the D string, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 2nd fret, open, 2nd fret. All right, so let's try it again at a slightly slower but connected tempo. And it comes in on a pickup. So I'll count it in, and maybe you can hear where we land on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it repeats. So now I'm going to try it with the wah pedal, because that really brings a whole other layer of Hendrixness to it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's always a little harder to control the wah pedal when you're sitting down and you're not extending your leg quite so far, but hopefully that gives a good enough idea of what it can sound like. And try playing along to the original. Take note of the fact that, like a lot of tape machine recordings from back in the day, it is a little detuned from your standard guitar tuning. It's somewhere around 20 cents flat, so either pitch shift the track up, or tune your guitar down by 20 cents or so, or just be okay with hearing a little bit of dissonance between your guitar and the original. But either way, such an iconic opening. So number 6, another one of my absolute favorites, I Don't Live Today. And this song is so cool because it almost completely defies the boundaries of genre. Because, of course, like a lot of Hendrix music, it is set in a psychedelic rock sort of atmosphere. But in hindsight, a lot of people consider it to be closer to gothic rock than anything else. And what's really cool is the intro is quite R&B influenced stylistically, and we'll go over that in a second. But the actual riff that happens throughout the verse is set over a 12-bar blues sort of progression. So again, this could be a really cool way to play a 12-bar blues with a cool riff instead of just chords. But either way, it'll show you a lot of different ways to sound closer to Hendrix and lots of different idiosyncrasies in his playing and how he'd approach an R&B kind of style or a psychedelic rock kind of style or blues or whatever it is. And it'll help you get his phrasing down. And let's take a look at that intro. So the intro starts with you sliding from the 5th fret to the 7th fret. But then when you land, you actually end up playing that octave. And you land in this chord shape here, which is like a major 6 kind of sound. And knowing Hendrix, he might have played this whole thing with his thumb. You can also use your first finger, you know, whatever you find more comfortable, it's up to you. Just important to note what the pinky is doing, because the first time we have that kind of walk down, the second time is slightly different. And it's important to note that anytime he's pedaling that root note, the B, there's an octave on it. And then we get into the verse. And this is kind of the main riff. And it's walking down the B minor pentatonic scale. But then when you get to that 10th fret, there's this bend on there, and that's really important to take note of. And especially when you land on that root note, lots of vibrato. So the next chord, where in a blues we'd normally go to the 4 chord, he instead goes down to A, lots of vibrato, and then back to our 1. And then the last time comes down to F sharp. And I guess technically that's not the next time, because like a blues does, he ends back on the 1, which sounds like this when you put it all together. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're going to go down to the A. And take note of that slide. That's really important. And again, I slid all the way down to the 2nd fret. And that's the end of the progression right here. Feel free to throw on an octave pedal if you want even more beef to the sound. Something like this. Again, that slide to the 5th fret is important. And sliding down to the 2nd fret. And this is a fun song to play around with heavy sounding fuzzes and, like I said, octave pedals if you want to, and it's so good. All right, so that was my list of 6 iconic Jimi Hendrix riffs that changed history. And historical context aside, and how they did totally reshape how people approach the electric guitar. As a player in 2021, there's still so much to learn from his playing. And just by going through the process of learning these riffs and maybe trying to get them as close as possible to the original, you're going to learn so much about, of course, Jimi Hendrix style playing and just, you know, innovative guitar playing in general that's still innovative to this day. And you'll learn so much about nuance and feeling and interesting chord choices for you to consider if you ever want to write songs or arrange or anything like that. And, you know, it's a masterclass in coming up with really catchy and groundbreaking, iconic riffs that you could use in a jam session, or hopefully you start to internalize them and internalize the phrasing and the feeling of them, and it could come out in your own writing as well, which would be very cool, right? Now that I've said cool 100 times in this video, it's time to say goodbye, and of course Jimi Hendrix is the coolest ever, to use the word one more time, and leave a comment down below of what your favorite Jimi Hendrix riff is, and let's just share some appreciation for him in the comments down below. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful day.